Wow, so many people. Hello and welcome to this first ever Spiel Educators Day. We're totally proud to present you this program. We're totally proud to have a day like this. It started out as a small idea. We could do something about teaching with games, about educating with games, and then people started sending us letters. We want to come with 10 persons, with 20 persons, and so it might get crammy later on. We have another room reserved with a video wall, so if it's too tight, we are video casting the whole day to the next room. So welcome. So good that you all are here and that you want to attend this program. People tend to think that playing is purely for leisure, and it should be. But if you're an educator, if you work in education, me as a father of 2 kids, I see every day that playing is a lot more than leisure. It teaches you something about yourself. It teaches you something about others and about the world. So today we would like to further this, and we'll hopefully learn something about the way games can be a part of education and how gaming gets the best out of human beings, big and small. So 1 or 2 more things. If you leave the room afterwards, there will be a certificate of participation. So if you want to show that to your employer, or if you just want a memory of this day, then you can take it from the table. As I said, next room in Saal Panorama, there will be a video wall showing everything we have here on this panel. And if you like to see new games from this year, we have the Neuheitenschau in Saal 1A, that's below Hall 1. And you can get tickets for this at the booth 3H100, that is the booth of Merz Verlag, who's organizing the Spiel. So I would like to give the word to Mikael Le Bourhis, who will be presenting this program this day for you, the next 90 minutes, I think. And you will be talking about?
Gaming Lab and Asmodee Research.
Okay. Have fun, have an interesting day. Thank you so much.
Bonjour à tous. First, I would like to thank Asmodee Germany and my colleagues to put me in contact with Merz Verlag. Thank you very much for this invitation and this opportunity to present my initiative in this very appealing panel. So, I'm Mikael Le Bourhis. I've made a PhD in neuroscience, but more importantly, I'm in charge of Asmodee Research, and I'm also leading the Gaming Lab program. And that's what I'm here today. I hope you are familiar with us, but I will just take a few moments to speak about Asmodee and our vision. Great game, amazing stories. This is our motto. In this company, we have terrific IPs with deep human and market values. These IPs are telling stories, creating communities, imagination, and memories. And this is our driving force. Asmodee, as a company, is an entertainment and content company passionate by board games. Gaming is core of Asmodee since 1995. Thanks to our passion, we became a global leading in gaming publisher and distributor. We also bring gaming brands to new experiments as video games and with Asmodee Digital, and entertainment with Iconic for books, for instance. Our mission is to tell immersive stories around the world. Asmodee development is still important, and we are representing like 18 distribution units and 18 game studios to cover a full spectrum of modern games. But as a leader, as a benevolent leader, Asmodee willing to take care of the market and to the gaming industry. At Asmodee, we create experiments for a global audience, thanks to the game to tell immersive stories that inspire people to push the boundaries of their imagination. And we think those stories create impact in their personal life. And this is my amazing stories. The merge of Asmodee position and my scientific background has resulted in the creation of Asmodee Research 2 years ago. Asmodee Research is the department of Asmodee to promote scientific research on board games and his influence. And we want to promote the societal value of the game behind only the entertainment part. Tabletop, video games, role-playing, escape game are all included in this project. The supported work are international and interdisciplinary in scope. The ambition of Asmodee Research is to demonstrate that gaming, besides its playful character, can have a positive impact on our society. It could be educational, social, clinical, and maybe more. Our activity is linked and supporting gaming, educational, and research professionals, and everybody convinced that gaming goes beyond entertainment. And Gaming Lab is the first project undertaken by Asmodee Research. It's a board game research supporting program. It's the result of the collaboration between Asmodee Research and one of our strategical partner, the Innovation Factory. At start, we have already created a scientific committee to oversee the ethic, the quality, ethic, quality, and sorry for that. Of the program. This committee is led by Gilles Brugère from Paris 13 University, and there are 15 members with as much expertise to oversee the selection project. With Gaming Lab, we want to define with researchers scientific interest of modern board games activities and influences. For this, we want to create cooperation between the board game industries and the scientific field. And we want, the two main objectives we have is to set up some scientific project with financial support and to spread this scientific knowledge to a global audience. Let's have a look of our current project. We have two types of call for projects. There is no theme behind it. It could be game studies, education, health, and other. And the first one we have is call for project for short-term project. It could be project up to 12 months with grant up to 15,000 euros, and it's totally international. We have already 4 projects supported. Each year there will be 3 to 4 projects selected for the call for project. The next call will be open in January 2020 and will be closed in April. The project will be selected in May, and we want to start them around September 2020. And today, I'm very pleased to announce our first external partnership with Libelud Foundation, recently announced. They are commitment with us for 5 years, and they will give 1 grant each year to support a new project in the theme of education and youth. So we are very open to this kind of partnership to make the project grow. On the other side, we have another type of call for project for PhD project. PhD is around 3 years. It's a specific grant named Hirth. It's a French collaboration. We need to have a collaboration between an industry and the laboratories. And for this type of grant, the laboratories has to be in France. So it's needed a collaboration. It could be seen as a constraint, but it could be seen as an opportunity to create collaboration. We want to open the first call for project for PhD at the end of the year in order to start the PhD in September 2020. And each year we want to have like 1 or 2 PhD started like this. Just a word of our first project selected in 2018. It was selected, the project is led by Philippe Robert from the Nice University. His team is working on all the technology who can help the seniors and neurodegenerative patients with behavior, wellness, and so on. And there are proposals to use a specific board game program and see how it could be good for senior patients and neuropsychiatric pathology in different kind of environment, clinical or in-house environment. This project I've started at the beginning of this year and will end at the end of the year, so we'll be able to have our first scientific report, maybe Q1 2020. Then last spring, we have a first wave of new selected projects, 3 projects. I can show it right away. We are very happy because it was very different in terms of theme and people who have submitted. So as you can see, we are supporting an anthropology project leading by US researchers named Rebecca Bayek. She will study a classical African board game named Songo and see his impact on social cohesion in Cameroon. Then Melissa Rogerson from Melbourne University will be study the digital part of hybrid board games and why these digital parts are very appealing for players. Then we are very happy to collaborate with Annick Pelletier from Canada. She is a remedial educator since many years, and she's handling a metacognition regulation program driven by a board game. And now she will be able to put that program into elementary school in Quebec and see if there is specific effect on child result. So these projects are starting right now, and I hope I will be able to present some result maybe next year, and maybe here too. All these announcements for call for projects are made on our website, gaminglab.org, and all the announcements for events are also presented here. Or on our Twitter account. Yeah, I'm talking about events because it's the other side of our program. We really want to organize some animation in this scientific community. So we have started to organize meetups in Paris. It's like a specific evening dedicated for talking about science and board games. We want to organize it every quarter in Paris for the moment and in French speaking. The idea is to have 3 hours with 3 experts invited, and around 15% are attendees each time. Each time we want to change location in Paris, expert invited, and theme. And here you have the 4 meetings we have already organized the past quarters. And we are very happy because we have now a partnership with a podcast named Proxygeux, a French podcast, who animate and broadcast these evenings. They are doing amazing jobs, and we are very happy about this kind of way to communicate with the community and able to share it with all the fans and people interested in the program. One thing is we are very pleased about this, but it's only in French, only in Paris. We are thinking about making this kind of evenings around France as well, but we are looking for partners to do this around the world in other cities. So if you want to become like an ambassador of it, just let us know, and we'll be able to share with you how we want to proceed and how we can create collaboration. Then we want to organize talk in game events to give the opportunity to researchers to present their studies to our broader audience. And of course, in our schedule, I want to have the 3 main board game events each time. So this year, we have organized our first talk in France in February pour le Festival de Cannes. It was a really good success for the organization, for us, and for the people who attended. Thanks to this good first try, we will do this partnership again next year with some conferences, and one of them will be made by Vincent, presented today. Then the Gen Con in August. This year, I went to Gen Con to create communication with the US community, and I'm very pleased because now we are discussing about organizing something like a full afternoon of talk next year in August for Gen Con. And of course, the SPIEL is very important as well. It was my desire to organize something here for this year, and I was very pleased to know that Mars Verlag organizes this day. So I'm very pleased to be here today to present the program, and I hope I will be able to come back next year to speak about more data and research report than just the program. Just a few words about a Discord network. Maybe you know Discord. It's a gaming social network. I'm very used to it for the game I like. And I've created a specific channel to discuss with the US community in order to organize the specific event for Gen Con. And it's very good for interaction, networking, and organizing the event. And I'm thinking bringing all the gaming lab community here to share the knowledge, to create synergies. So I like this tool, and once again, if you are interested to join this community, just let us know, and I will send you an invitation. And the final things I will present is the board game studies. Maybe you know it. It's a multidisciplinary researcher association. Every year they are organizing a colloquium about research and gaming. This year it was in Bologna in Italy. And the next one will be organized in Paris. It will be in May 2020. The Paris 13 University, La Haute École de Bruxelles, and Gaming Lab are partners of the organization. And the call for paper to participate to this colloquium is already online. So if you are interested, you have the link here to submit your project. And maybe if you have more questions, Vincent and me could answer to it. So this is it for my project. I really want to thank Mars Verlag for the opportunity to present it. If you have some question about details, I will be very happy to answer it. Just after me, we have taken with the Gaming Lab organization the opportunity to invite 4 people, but unfortunately, Francisca has to move in Australia, so she can't be here today, but I'm very pleased to have Vincent, Michael, and Tiago to animate this roundtable. You have the title here. So I will leave the stage to this guy. And thanks again for your attention. And if you have questions, I'm just here. Thanks. Questions? Well, yeah.
If you're interested in participating as a company when you develop some educational games, is that also open for
Can you apply as a company to participate if you developed some games already, or is it only open for development of new games?
Good question. The Gaming Lab program is not a program to create board games. It's a program to study the effect of board games. So our core for project are not to finance the creation of new board games, but just to finance studying the effect. It could be educational, it would be in health environment, but we don't promote creation of tools, just studying.
That's great, thank you.
Yep.
So if we are a school, can we apply somewhere
If we are a school, can we apply somewhere to participate in such studies and tell, okay, we are willing to try some game with our students? Is that possible?
There is 4 ways we want to support. There is game studies in general, education, health, and citizen research. So people who work in school who want to promote a program and they are not from the academic side of science can apply as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there more questions? Okay, if this is not the case, let's thank Michael once again.
Thank you.
It's working. Thank you. Hello everyone. I'm Vincent Berry. So as Michael was saying, I'm a sociologist in education, and I'm more a sociologist in games that exist. I'm one of the rare species. I'm working in the University of Paris 13. We have numbers in France for university. That's the north of Paris. I'm working in a department which is now a department of education, but for a long time. When this department has been created, it was in the 80s. It was the department of game and play studies. So it was one of the first academic department who had the ambition to study play and games, and we were related to education because one of our concern was to better understand the relation between play, games, learning, and education in general. So my goal this morning is just to give you, to draw you how some questions arise in the academic field about how can we measure the impact of play and games in the development or in the process of learning. And I'm going to give you some example of study and what kind of problem we have, or what kind of result we have when we try to study the impact of game and play on education. What?
Faut que tu vises là-bas, je crois.
Ah, il faut que... Ça marche pas? Si? Ah, okay, sorry. So this concern about game and play and to understand the relation between gameplay and learning is not a new interrogation, is not a new concern. When you look at the history of pedagogy, you can find some honorable ancestors, and mainly in philosophy, who are interested to understand this question. So when you look at Plato or Aristotle, you have some concern about how game is part of education. So when you're reading the law of Plato, you can see that he's promoting board games, particularly Peteia, the Peteia, or the police, just to contribute to the education of a good citizen. He was also concerned about sport game and thinking that sport game is a good way to educate a good citizen of Athens. Mainly it was violent sport game, but let's say it was a good, there was a good value about a sport game. So for the European situation, and mainly the French situation, when we look, it's always in philosophy that firstly some people ask, okay, what if we are using game in education? So in France, Montaigne was one of the first thinking that game is the most serious activity of child. But it's really in the 18th century that we start to have a more developed pedagogical thought about the uses of game and play in education. But what's interesting is that for the European situation, that different traditions started. So in France, Rousseau, in his book called Les Mille, was developing a new conception of childhood, and he was seeing child as a growing plant, and the role of the educator was to help him to grow, to give him the good tools to grow. Meanwhile, at the same time or close, here in Germany, there's a different way of seeing the role and the function of play and game, who was related to the German Romantic movement. So Schiller was one of the preeminent thinker of that, seeing in play and games the creativity, and that's what he was thinking, that play is what makes human and different. So he's got a vision, a positive vision of game and play, more positive than Rousseau, thinking that play is the highest level of creativity. And you can see that Froebel was in this movement, in this thought, and he was Froebel was engaging, promoting institution of education where free play is in the heart of the process of education, which is not the case in France. And at the same time, or a little bit later, you can see the pragmatic philosopher who are thinking that game is and play are a good way of learning because it's mainly related to learning by doing. So that was more interesting. It's less about the question about creativity, just like Schiller or Froebel, but more game or play is really interesting because it's situating knowledge. You have to do something, so that's the real process of learning from this point of view. So Locke was important, and Dewey, of course, promoted game and play in terms of education. So it's just not intellectual vision, that is intellectual vision, but it had impact on how different countries attributed or used game in their education system. If you see the preschool system in France, game and board games and play are present, but they are, just as Rousseau was saying, they are more depending on the adult's will. So if the kids wants to play to board games, the teacher is mainly proposing the kind of game. If you look at the kindergarten, the free play is more central, so kids have more freedom to choose their game, to produce their games. That's not the situation in France. And when you're saying to teacher, they think that kids play, but yeah, they play, but something that is under the supervision of the teacher. So you can see that it's not just intellectual thought, it had impact on the educational system in different countries. So I was saying that the 18th century, the moment where some people starting to think about the place of game and in the education, and you can see, so it's coming from, if one day you go to France, you have to go to the Messe of Education in Rouen, where they have a giant collection of pedagogical material. So here you can see different board games who has been used in class. So here you have Le Nouveau Jeu des Modes Français, the new board games of just to teach to little girls the fashion. Here you have what's the English for jeu de loi?
Goose game.
Yeah, loose game. You say that? Yeah, about Greece. So you have also, you can find some innovation in the 18th century, just like Pasteur Oberlin, who created a lot of card games to teach for kids mainly between 6 and 12, botanic or geography, stuff like that. So he was inventing a lot of games, and we have the material here. So 18th century too, you can find, so here it was a board game to teach the royal family in Europe, so which was mainly about history. Here you've got, I found one in my grandmother's basement, so to teach to kids the geography of France department. You also have what we call, I'm not sure about the translation, civic education. So we have to teach about the good manners and stuff like that. So that was so you don't have to stand on a chair, for example. It's a bad example. So when you look at the use of board games or games in general, you can see mainly in France that the use or the ratio is really low. We don't have a lot of board games or video games used in class. Some countries are more engaged, more advanced. But the pedagogy, mainly in France, is traditional. It's transmissive. We call it transmissive. Just I'm teaching, you're writing, you have to take notes and stuff like that. So board games is not, or video games are not that used. Yeah. So when you look, so the scientific literature now is mainly focused on video games. So the study, so that's why it's important to support board game studies, because video games doesn't need it. Video games is mainly the privileged object of research now. So we have a lot of meta-analyses of serious game impact, stuff like that. So you really have few empirical study of, you have some, but they're really rare, or they really just, how could I say, fragmented in the academic field. So the few we have is that, in fact, the improvement, we observe little improvement in effectiveness in terms of skills and knowledge on the subject taught compared to traditional pedagogy. So it's a little bit disappointing. Sometimes you're thinking, I'm going to use games and they're going to be much better, I don't know, to teach history and stuff like that. And for video games, you see little differences, but they're not that big. Where you really have an effect you can measure is about motivation and involvement, which is not nothing. So we have to have this in mind. So maybe the results are not that impressive, but the engagement and the involvement is important. With this paradox, sometimes when you're using board games or video games, the students who are not usually that good in terms of result make better results, and the good one make worse results. They're still good, but so you have this paradox of using board games. And when they have, so where the study we have converge is about the effect of self-esteem, of the pleasure of playing and being at school. So that's something where study converge. So, but also when you're making meta-analysis of the literature, you have this more in detail. You can see that games can, using games have, so in the study where you can see some differences is mainly when board games is used by other pedagogical setup, just like explaining. So the role of the teacher is really important, the way that the board game or the video game is introduced. Games that consist of simple decision trees or quiz, we know that, oh, I made an educational board game, it's just a quiz, just questions, like a regular exercise. So they have no more, they make no differences. So the effect of game is mainly seen not on one session, but really can measure that by using it in a long period of time. And what we are not sure is that when you're when I was seeing that the study are measuring an impact of involvement and engagement, we're not sure that it's because it's a game, a video game or board game, or because it's an active method. You know what I mean? Just like you were saying, okay, kids, you're students. I'm not telling to my students, okay, kids, but let's go to the museum. You could have an effect of involvement, or let's do something different. Can be the explanation of the motivation effect. And we have also a lot of methodological problem is that more you try to see in detail the differences between traditional pedagogy and let's say ludopedagogy or play pedagogy, more it's detailed, less you see in fact the differences, but that's a problem of methodology in social science. So when you look at this literature, you have this kind of results. Some studies show amazing results. Some of them are more are moderating these results. But what's really interesting is that the blind spot, mainly of this research, is the actor play culture, because and that's where I'm arriving. I'm with my studies. So. Sometimes, I don't say all of the time, but we think that play is something natural to the kids. So let's use a board game, or let's use a game and kids gonna play. But when you're making statistical survey, just like I'm trying to do in France, you can see important inequalities in terms of play culture, and more than video games in terms of board games culture. So sometimes the problem you can have is that you're using a board game in class, but you don't see that you're adding a level of complexity because you're supposing that kids know how to play this kind of board games, but in fact they're not. They're not socialized to this kind of game. When you think of, I don't know, the Settler of Catan, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to use the Settler of Catan to, I don't know, just to teach history or changing the universe, stuff like that. But you're adding a complexity because a lot of kids didn't play to the Settler of Catan. Anyway, at least in the French situation. So that's one of the problems we have. What is the play culture of the people? And the other problem, but I won't solve it here now, is that how do you transfer something you learned in a board games or in the video games to another situation? But let's see about the problem of play culture when you use a board game or a video game in class. So I'm going to show you some results from a statistical survey I've led with a colleague, with other sociologists. It was a big panel in France of people, and we were focused on what kind of board game do they play, but what are their board games culture? Do they know the Settler of Catan? Do they know the Monopoly? Let's be clear, Monopoly is the most famous one. So we were testing people about their culture and also about their practices. So when you look about the situation, at the first sight, it looks very important. And 90% of the population declare have played a board game. They say, yeah, in my life I just played chess or, I don't know, belote, a traditional French card game. And when you look more in detail, 60, so the majority, they have played during the past year, but 55% occasionally, I mean, just 1 or 2 times or 3 times, 4 in the year, and just 10% are playing frequently board games. So 8% every month and 2% every week. So these 2% of French are here or in the Spiel today. So board games, when you look very in a large point of view, you can say, okay, board games concern everyone in terms of social class. But when you start to look in terms of frequency and what kind of board game practices, you're going to have some social stratification. So I won't comment everything, just to show you how we are making stats. But so still at the general point of view, if you mix every kind of practices, like parental practices with playing with kids or adult practices, you see that women are more involved than men in terms of declaring practices and board games. We're going to see it's really related to their role for the French situation with the kids. They are more than the father introducing board games with the kids. But when you start to look in more detail, you can see that upper class and middle class are more involved. They know much more board games than popular class. And working class and have less knowledge of board games. I'll show you more than that. So when you look at, when you try to see the different kind of practice, of course you have 2 big amounts of activity around board games, parental practices and adult practices. I'm going to show you just the parental practices because time is running. It's really more stratified in terms of sociology. So when you are asking the parents, do you play board games with your children? So 86 parents of the declare, yes, I've played recently board games. And when you look at the most mentioned, the most quoted board games, it's mainly Monopoly, Clue, Connect 4 and Payday, of course. So I would be really interested to do the same study in other countries to see what's the difference. So they start mainly when the kids are 3 years old. what's really interesting is that you have a first decrease. It decreases when the kid starts to be 6 years old. It's related to the French education system. They're starting to go in school. They have more leisure activities, so less time to play with the parents. But you have a big decrease at 12, so where the frequency is really decreasing quickly. And when you compare with video games, that's the moment where the video games is taking the lead. So it's related to the autonomy of the child who's become a teenager. So the majority of his cultural activity are with peers, with friends, stuff like that. So family disappear little bit by little bit. But when you look at the stratification, if you just look at people who declares, yes, I played with my kids, there's no social difference apparently. But when you look in terms of frequency and diversity of board games, you see two big factors. The first one is the diploma of the parents. So more the parents have an educated a level of education, more they play board games. So more they attribute to board games an educational value. And especially, and you also have an effect of gender. So the mother who are more involved in using board games with their kids. So when you are adding the two factors, educated mother, that's where you have the more frequent activity of board games with kids. So what does that show is that when you compare the board game culture of kids, you can see a real inequality of terms of knowledge. So when you look at kids from the popular class, they know board games, but they don't know mainly the ABBA games, for example. They've not that exposed to. They mainly know the Monopoly or the mass edition, but all the intermediates. I don't know the English for this one. Croque-carotte. It's a game with rabbits. You throw a dice. What's the name? Yeah. Okay, this one, which is used. It's mainly used in the middle of upper class. So what's really interesting, and so the result is leading us in terms of policy of education, is that if you want to use or develop a program of board games in class, that means you have to have in mind that kids are not equal in terms of board games culture, and that if you're using board games, you can have the risk to add a level of complexity, that they also have to understand the game. So that's what we are supporting and promoting, is that if you want to use board games in class, first you have to give them board games for free. They have to learn first to play board game with no direct educational intention, but just to keep them more equal in terms of knowledge and skills in board games. Thanks for your attention.
All right, so I guess there are a lot of questions, so please use the microphone. So there is one question, okay?
Hi, thank you very much for that interesting presentation. I'm Saskia Ruth from the German Institute of Global and Area Studies. My target audience is usually students at universities, and I also use games in class. I have one question. Do you have experience with differences between off-the-shelf games and custom-built games to teach about specific topics?
What the shelf games?
Off-the-shelf games you can buy here,
yeah,
which are developed for a different audience, so kind of commercial audience, and custom-built games which are developed exactly with the purpose of education.
So in my lab, and Michaël is working like that, they're designing games for a specific intention, and we have both of them. So on this study we had is both of them, so mainly but the difference that when we're making games, it's not the same thing that studying your own games than studying material games. And your question was, is there differences? I think the problem is the same, is that most of the time, unless but Michaël is really innovative, most of the time you're using mechanics coming from another game. You're going to say, oh, I'm going to make a deck building game based on... for example, we've developed and we make a study about a game which is Erasmus Hispanicus. It was a board game to teach the history of Spain. And they've mixed two games. They've mixed Timeline and they've mixed the... Help me, Mika. Les Aventuriers du Rail. The Ticket to Ride. Yeah. And we have this result that, and mainly in my university, which is in a popular area of Paris, it's the north of Paris, most of the students didn't know Ticket to Ride. So that's where we were saying, oh, we're adding a complexity to what we want to teach. Yeah.
Okay, I guess there are two more questions.
Yeah, okay. My question was answered.
Just go for it.
I was just... Yeah. Okay.
Are you sure? Okay.
I was just curious, speaking from a level where they're in middle school, so like 12 years old, if your research focuses on any level of the Goffmanian understanding of presentation of self and the establishment of reflexive other and things like that, specifically looking at games that as a behavioral means. So you mentioned games earlier that we're talking about manners and culture and socialization. Yeah. And I was wondering if any of your research has looked into the ways in which during that very developmental time period, they are able to establish kind of an understanding of identity in relation to each other, because board games are very face-to-face interactive in contrast to other forms of communication that they're used to. So I was wondering if that's a part of the study, or something that you can bring into an understanding of like kind of the interaction aspect.
No, you're right. I'm more on the first part you were mentioning. So this kind of study is close to the Bourdieusian approach. So we are looking how some capital you have in the family has an impact in the school. So you're right. We could do the same. That doesn't mean that it invalidates the other. It's just the main focus is that because we've seen that when you're using board games in class, you're just like in the Bourdieusian approach, that the language you use makes sense for some kids because it's the same that they have in the house. So when you use a game, so the approach we have is that board game is a cultural capital. We try to measure, and but you're right. After that, we don't see the kind of interaction, and where we can converge is that. What we see is, and something is not just related to the parents' social properties, it's also related to the structure of the siblings, you say that? Yeah, and of course it is, so it's important in terms of the diversity of games and mainly of the diversity of their play culture. For example, when you have a brother and a sister in the same family, the result of the test of knowing board games makes a big difference. It's more visible in terms of video games, because video games is more gendered than board games. So for example, if you're testing kids, the one who's got a sister, they know, or the girl who had a brother, they know a lot of more games than a girl who hasn't a brother who's got just a sister. So you're right, there's interaction in the family that makes difference too.
Okay, there was one question, yeah.
Yes. So kind of related to what she was talking about earlier, my question is, have you looked into at all the effect of student-made board games? So when students are presented with content and they need to take that to a much further step and really think about the function behind that content, what that does as far as their overall understanding.
Yeah, I'll be disappointing. No, I didn't study that. But you're right, it's part, so Michaël is studying more what kind of pedagogy you can use around board games. So here it's really simple. I'm just showing using board games from the market or board games that the teacher created. But you're right, you have some pedagogy where students are creating games. So I don't have that in my sample. Or yeah.
Okay, so there is the last question because we have some time issues.
Hello, I'm from Turkey. I'm Nursevenler. And can I contribute to the first question? Because we've been applying game-based learning program in Turkey in some schools. And in the first question, it was about the games, and we believe that teachers first should know the game very well, internalize it, love it, to give the positive effect on the students. And we should analyze the game according to its thinking skills, you know, which thinking skills it serves for people. For example, we use Dixit for creative thinking, and it can be used from age 6, even if the game is starts from 8+. And also we use Double to increase the visual perception for all ages, and some trainers for rapid reading especially recommends Double for practicing the visual perception. And the important thing is to analyze the game accordingly. Otherwise, you don't have to use a game that is specifically produced for education. You should go deeply into the game to see what it can serve. It depends on your perspective too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but when you look at the game study and mainly the video games, the majority of the study is focused on the device, on how it's working, its properties. So you're right, when you look closely at any board games, or not any, but some board games or video games, you can see how they're a kind of I would say in French, dispositif is how they are a device, or they have property very good for learning this kind of skill. So you're right, you have to, and there's a lot of research about that, showing how, I don't know, even in Monopoly, we have a PhD in Paris just saying, okay, let's use Monopoly just to, so there's much be more interesting than Monopoly, I agree, but let's try this one. So how kids are using has to count or stuff like that. So you can find the didactic properties of board games. But it's the point I'm trying to insist on is that every kind of media, video games, board games, a movie, a book, they have properties for education, but these properties need some pre-skills to the kids in where they can evolve into it. You know what I mean? Just like when you're using a book, we know that kids who has been used by their parents to use book have more facility in terms of engagement. So that's the same question we have. You're right, we have to see if a board game is is interesting or not in terms of learning, but we also have to see the player, the kids. Do they have access to that, or they have a culture that helps them to get to be involved? That's why sometimes I'm promoting, before using games for learning, just let's use game for playing, for the pleasure of the play, and then we can use it in a more educational way. But I agree with you.
Okay, so let's thank the speaker once again. And we will directly go on. So the next talk.
Hi, I'm Mikaël Huchette. So I'm not so familiar with English, so I prefer to have my notes. And I'm sure my colleagues help me to understand your questions if I don't understand. I'm Mikaël Huchette, and I'm working in the same lab as Vincent in Université Paris 13. So I will deal about why teachers innovate by conceiving and designing and using board games at schools. So in my lab, in our lab, we began to identify and to have an interest for the practice of teachers in secondary and higher education, who have designed and who have made games for use them in class with their students. I'm going to tell you about some observations.
Thanks.
Yes. So I'm going to tell you about some observations I have done during our meetings with these teachers. So when I say that they have designed games, what exactly it is about? In fact, teachers do not design just a game, but a pedagogical situation of which the game is one element. When asked about the games they have designed, they tell us about a pedagogical system that they think as coherent. That means, for example, a lesson scenario in a limited time with a beginning and an end, with steps, with actions of students, with actions of themselves as teacher, the materials to be used, etc. So, yes, is there a problem? No, it's not okay. It's okay now? Okay. So I said that teachers do not design only a game, but a pedagogical situation. The game is therefore designed at the same time as the teaching scenario for a specific public. So, for example, Sandrine Cadena is a teacher. She is a professor of marketing at university. She designed cards to be used in her course about retail stores marketing. She has made 6 types of cards. You can see on the picture. So 4 piles correspond to 4 categories of parameters for all existing retail stores. 1 pile corresponds to customers' typical behaviors, and 1 pile corresponds to expert advice. Since the beginning, she had planned to use these cards at the first step of her course in 2 stages. So the first stage is a 2-hour game session. Students teams have to draw their ideal store within parameters and constraints given by cards they have taken. And the second stage is a 2-hour presentation session. Students present their drawing and explain their concept of store to the whole class. Within the discussion, the teacher introduces the need of the concepts that will be developed in the following course. So you can see on the right an example of drawing of students. Now, how can we say that teachers innovate by designing games? There is, in fact, various degrees of games innovating creation. As a low degree, I propose to place the use without modification of existing games or well-known game principles. I think about a biology teacher, for example, at university, who makes elaborate crossword puzzles by a group of students for other students in order to focus on key concepts of the course they have taken and to memorize these concepts. So this way of teaching is new in the French university context, but I think we can be agree that it is not creative concerning strictly the game design. To a little bit higher degree, So this biotechnology, it's okay? Yes. Biotechnology. Teachers in high schools. In French, we call that lycée. They take and adapt the mechanics of Trivial Pursuit with a fiction. The fiction is you have to save the world against a viral pandemic. Students have to respond to questions, to validate categories of expertise in order to create a vaccine. On the central board, you can see, and to build clinics all over the world on the other boards. A logic of cooperation is introduced between the teams playing on each board, and a logic of competition between two classes. Here, too, the questions are elaborated by groups of students, and the questions are shared. It's a way for these teachers to do course reviews. And to a greater degree of game creation, this game designed by Jasmine Latapi with a teacher educator at the university. Her aim, her goal is to initiate students about how French high school works. She has designed this game and has planned to use it to prepare and to debrief internships in a high school for students. The game mechanics and the material are not direct coming from existing games. They are more coming from didactic choices. Didactic choices. That is a reflection on the content to be learned and the kind of reasoning to support. Here, the proposed fiction, that is leading an educational project. The rules and of the game, the material, all these elements contain in themselves a model of how a high school works, focused on the roles of staff members and on the typical steps of a pedagogic project. So the content, we can say, they contain the game design contain the theory to be learned. We can see that. So let us know with the question why teachers innovate by creating games. So why do they design all these games? So in general, when teachers are asked about the origin of their idea, they tell they were not satisfied about a problematic situation. For example, about learning, that the lack, they tell us about the lack in student knowledge at the end of the course. They tell us about the boring nature of any repetitive learning activities. They tell us about a lack in the curriculum. Like Jasmine Latapi, she saw that at the step of the curriculum, there was no course about the role of the actors, of the staff in a lycée, for example. They tell us about problematic students' motivation and self-esteem. As I have written relationship to knowledge, that is the topic. So they also speak of an individual's desire for change that meets a social context that boosts them. You can see contexts on the picture. So, for example, the meeting, what they boost them is the meeting of staff members of the University Pedagogical Service, or the existence of a game lab in their professional environment, or colleagues' interest in games, a personal practice of games, and their own education that have support them trying games in class, for example. So let's now see what supports the game design choices. So in the case of high degree creation, I have given, we have seen that Sandrine in marketing and Jasmine in teacher education have first a didactic reflection on the knowledge to be learned, to learn. In the background, a pedagogical strategy that steers the designing of their games. Let me show you another example in mathematics. So Sebastian Okun is a teacher in mathematics at college that is middle school in France. So Sebastian Okun teaches mathematics, and he finds students difficulties in geometry to move from perceptions-based and instruments-based reasoning to a deductive reasoning. And his goal is to move students to a deductive reasoning. So he thinks these difficulties is caused by a lot of implicits in the way of teaching, and his game aims to make explicit a lot of implicit properties of squares. So you can see his cards and a piece of Lego that materializes the constraints, the geometrical constraints in a figure. So to conclude, teachers we have met are relatively isolated and are in the beginning of their game project. I think it could be beneficial for them and for educational system and at last for students to federate and support their expertise and projects. So that generate a lot of issues that interest us in our lab. For example, how can we dynamize communities of teachers about these issues? How support the dissemination of artisanal games? And another, how to support the evaluation of these pedagogical devices in the class. So thank you for your attention.
All right, are there questions? Okay, there is one over there.
Je me mets à côté pour que vous puissiez m'aider à répondre. Non, à comprendre les questions.
Thank you very much for the talk. I want to ask, is there a platform where educational board games are shared so that people can, like there were some amazing examples which you presented. Is there a platform where the games are shared?
So in my, I know it does not exist, but we are our lab take part in a project which is one of the goals between university and high schools in France, in the near of Paris.
Okay. Yeah, one more question.
Hi, yeah, I have a very related question to this. If you think about game adaptation of existing games, have you come across teachers that had problems to kind of make their material available in public domain? Because this is copyrighted material. If it's adapted to a specific context, are there any ideas of game publishers, for example, as well, to make this possible for the educational context?
So it's real questions, an issue, and we have not any real response because the dissemination is not. It's recently a question, and. So the most of our projects in our lab and the projects of teachers, la licence maybe we suppose you have to use Creative Commons in university. We can use this, your Creative Commons license, but I don't know exactly. It's an issue.
Just for adding, maybe if there is a lot of demands to create a platform to gather all this kind of project and find a way to be legal to the use of these different modification of games, maybe there could be a project that a group of teachers can communicate with us, and maybe it could be a future game lab project to do so. So contact us, maybe we can create a Discord live, like I've said earlier, to create this discussion and see how we can work together.
Thank you.
All right. Is there another question? Okay, if this is not the case, let's thank the speaker once again. And the next talk will be given by Tiago Hirth.
Please pass. So, okay. Hello, my name is Tiago Hirth. I'm half Portuguese, half German, so excuse my English. I'm also a mathematician. If half of the audience falls asleep now, that's okay. The other half will be mathematicians. I'm already half. Anyway. As a small tribute, the title should be Was sind und was sollen die Zahlen, die Spiele, as to a very famous paper. Of course, I do not answer any of that, and the rest of the talk is unrelated. However, I have multiple interests, among which education, of course, else I wouldn't be here, history, philosophy, mathematics, and games. And so I denounce myself a little bit as a mathematical adventure. Think Indiana Jones with more abstraction and less death traps. But I do have a whip. Hopefully. There's the first death trap. Can I ask someone to come to stage to help me? I have previously selected a volunteer. Big hand for Kirsten. Kirsten will help us with the first thing, and then I wanted to start to make this a little bit more interactive. I'm going to ask every one of you to participate in some sort of a game, a quiz. And I'm going to ask you to put one finger here, I'm going to put another finger here, and then we're going to make a rectangle, yeah, just like this. And there's a constant perimeter, and there's an area. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think happens to this area when we make it, yeah, perfect. Now, there are three options. It either stays the same, hands up if you think this is the truth, cool. It gets smaller, no one, wow. Or it gets bigger. All right, we are divided 50-50. Thank you very much, Kirsten. Now, fun fact, this is a question of mathematics. I'm boring the guys with the cameras because I move around a lot, pardon. I will stay here now. the same question can be asked geometrically. Instead of using a piece of rope, we can look at these shapes, and I guarantee you, I've spent many hours trying to make this happen, that the perimeter is always the same. What do you think happens to the area? It's more or less the same question now with a geometrical shape, or I can ask the question the other way around. All these areas are the same, what happens to the perimeter? Now, for those who said it gets smaller or it gets bigger, don't be sad, that is the wrong answer. Curiously, you are pretty much what I expected to happen, that you're wrong. Of course, for people who have a bigger mathematical training, if you just imagine that you put, you plug in numbers, right? You have, for instance, here you would, whoop, I'm shaking. You have 1 and 3, then you can just multiply 1 by 3 and you would get an area of 3. But if you use the same perimeter for a square, you would plug in 2 and 2. 2 by 2 is 4, and you now have the answer. Of course, this requires some technical skills that most people, when they answer a question intuitively, they don't think about it. That's what we call intuition. The same thing happens with numbers. We don't have to work this out geometrically. We can look at these numbers, and then someone will yell out in the audience that which is the biggest number of these multiplications? Well, the square of those two, or the square of 3, 5, 3, 3. I did the calculations, I plugged in these numbers, so this one looks bigger than this one, but of course the square of a number is bigger than, well, for certain conditions. Anyway, of course this is about games and not about boring mathematicals. For 2 integers bigger than 0, a times b, they will be smaller than the square of the 2. But it concerns a mathematics teacher, how we can transmit these ideas into, or how we can get students to become good at them. And for this, I took an initial poll on a game called Product, which derived from Product Wars, invented by Nick Bentley, and then developed together with João Pedro Neto in Portugal. And it's an abstract game. There are 2 players, a red player and a green player. However, both players can play both kind of pieces. The first player has to play a single piece. The red player chooses to play red. He could have placed a green piece as well, because both players can play any kind of piece. Now, green answers with 2 green parts, just to illustrate that green can play 2 green pieces, but he could also have chosen 2 red ones. Red answers, and here comes the winning mechanic, is the 2 biggest groups get multiplied together, and whoever has the biggest product at the end wins. In this case, red placed 1 red piece and 1 green piece, making use of his power to place green pieces for the first time, and has the total of 1 point. At the same time, green also has 1 point because, well, he has 3 groups, but we only used the 2 biggest ones, and anyway, it's only 1 times 1 times, well, 1 times 1. Now, green thinks, well, I'm going to take profit on that last play, and I'm going to play 2 green pieces, and he has now the total product of 2 times 4. Those are his 2 biggest groups, and red thinks, well, I'll play a green piece here, and so the second biggest group for green becomes 0, and 0 times I don't really care is 0. Okay, so suddenly red is winning, even though red has, there's a mistake there. As any mathematician will have at least one big basic arithmetic problem wrong. But anyway, this just shows to illustrate that this game, I'll come back to this because I want to speak a little bit more about why I got interested in this question. But in Portugal, we have a big national championship of mathematical games or abstract games. Each year, for the last 16 years, we have 6 different abstract games played by school children from the ages, from 1st grade until end of high school, and in 4 categories. And this is supported by the Teachers Mathematics Association of Portugal, by the local science network, by the Mathematical Society, and by the Ludus Association, which I'm part of, so I'm highly biased. It looks a little bit like this. We have about 100,000 participants Portugal-wide. In the finals, we have about 2,000 students each year competing against each other, playing these games. And so this year, I believe the games are Traffic Lights, Cats and Dogs, Slime Trail, Produto, which I showed previously, Breakthrough, and I think it's Gomoku. No, not Gomoku. well, first one to take a group win. So it's not Go in its full extension, but as soon as someone captures, he wins. So it's a bit quicker because we have to focus. Players have to compete against each other. It's a big championship. It has to happen in one day, and we need to have some sort of rotation. They play the Swiss tournament style and so on. If you want more details on the tournament, come talk to me afterwards. I don't want to bore the other half of the group. Anyway, this is a big endeavor. A lot of teachers take part. We have a lot of explainers. We have, yeah, it's a huge event. And above all, we have a lot of players. And then questions naturally arise. I mean, we have been doing this for 16 years. Does this have an effect in schools? How does it affect schools? How do teachers work with these kind of things? How do children evolve with these kind of things? And we're still beginning to look into these kinds of questions. And a query we did last year, for instance, asked teachers how do they prepare children for these sort of things and where do they do that. Most of them do it as classroom games. Some of them organize school tournaments and so on. And why do they use this? To motivate children. Most of them are mathematics teachers. There are some exceptions to that, but the big majority are mathematics teachers. To engage bad students and so on. Now, this how students change. It kind of, I mean, if you want to motivate and then suddenly people get to create bonds, have another kind of initiative, are more abstractly involved and so on, all of them key features for mathematics. And of course, we also want to know how and where and what materials they use to play. So do they construct their own games? What sort of constructions? These were some questions asked previously. We have developed a game kit specifically for teachers to use. Or do they just print something else? That's the big advantage of abstract games. You can just print it out, or you can actually just play it with pen and paper. Anyone who has played Dots and Boxes or Sprouts or so on will know those are really good games, and they will engage people and will get them talking about that, which ends up being a very good tool. How do teachers see them, or what good things do teachers see in those games? For instance, they believe that, so we had feedback from 400 teachers, we had feedback from about 106, all of them. So yeah, all of them said, well, it improves concentration, it improves engagement, motivation, planning, and so forth. Some of them says it gives them superpowers, haha. And curiously, none of them believe it contributes to career ambitions, which makes me very sad. But in general, there is this idea that it somehow, improves the kids who are playing it, and actually also the teachers. And actually, coming back to our initial question, with the rope, with the mathematical intuition part, I asked exactly the questions I've shown you at the beginning of the talk. I have asked students, and I have a small sample. So it's a preliminary study. We would have to have much more resources and much more students, and perhaps not only do it in Portugal and so on. But of course, this is all a scientific process, so there have to be rules, and I cannot just say this is like this. But this preliminary study is very promising in the sense of that. In general, product players, here in red, answered majorly better than non-product players. So children from the ages of 6 to 18 were asked, and in general, they would answer better. Specifically, on the rope question, you see there's a crazy distinction. So it's 47% answered correctly, which is more or less what we expect. But opposed to non-product players and to general players, they were better at answering this. So players who played product are perhaps making some sort of advancement in this mathematical intuition. Of course, this does not mean that they are better at mathematics, because mathematics is a universe. But what sort of things and how do these games contribute, and specifically how can we use them in education, has been an ongoing question in our research group. And so recently, last September, we started the project called 8x8, so 8x8, so shameless plug here. And the idea is, what sort of games can you play on an 8x8 board? They are really easy to produce. You just need to have a gridded line, like every math teacher would know, gridded line. And so it couldn't be a chessboard, but it could also just be a square divided into squares. And yeah, so they can use these in classrooms, they can use these to promote, and so this project started in September, it will be running for a whole year. We will have a website running end of November, likely, with resources, with games you can play on an 8x8 board. There are, answering to another question, there are thousands of platforms where you can get games from. Of course, it all depends what you want to use them for and in which specific context. In this context, it will be to promote mathematics and educational purposes for children between the age of 6 and 12, specifically. Of course, this is something which has potential to grow, and we have to start somewhere with some sort of game, with some sort of board, with some sort of age group, with some sort of discipline, before we can extrapolate to questions about the universe. Anyway, games are very useful tools and have a strong connection to mathematics. They promote concentration. They make people visualize things ahead of time. People are required to think first and then act. They have to weigh options, and they promote abstraction. So here's an argument that they are very good to promote mathematics. If it's really true or not, well, there's more work to be done. This is our project. Look us up. And I would like to really thank Michael and Asmodee Research to invite us all here and to get this whole conversation started. And if you have any questions about abstract games, 8x8, the championship and so on, I'll be happy to speak about that. And I think now we're going to do the round table and speak about things. Okay.
Yeah, many thanks. Great talk. So are there questions?
Cool.
Hi, thank you for that. That was great. Do teachers express a specific preference for abstract games over themed games?
Well, abstract games have the big advantage that you have free access to them. They're really easy to implement. As for preference, I mean, games are starting to be used in the classroom. I mean, we have a big game industry boom right now. It has been going on, so I cannot really say that there is a preference in general, but I would likely think that people who already are board gamers might have a preference to the games they already know. And which is also something we encounter when giving teacher trainings about these games, is that even though these abstract games are very simple, they have a very simple rule set, there is a learning curve. And there's a learning curve to play the games well, because they're usually very deep and very profound games where you can delve into very deep mathematical questions, like for instance the game of Hex. You can prove mathematical statements with it and so on. As opposed to topical games where you have a setting and so on. I mean, it all depends within the context. So we have discussed this at the Board Game Studies Colloquium, for instance, for history classes. Perhaps it's not the right tool to use an abstract game to think about, about teaching something about ancient Rome, which doesn't mean that it cannot be useful, as there are other projects, for instance, the Ludi project, which uses abstract mathematic games to look at rule sets and so on, and thinks about how these games could have been played. And yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then there in the back, there's another question. You just go ahead.
If you work at a school, sometimes spending money is a problem. Do you know about any fundings a school can get in Europe to buy games?
Well, you can talk to Michael about the money. No, so there are multiple projects out there. I mean, Asmodee Research is funding certain ideas. Like Michael has stressed before, I think if there is a big enough interest by educators to do something like that, there might be funding for it. And I think this is in general. If there is a big enough quorum, there will be the market will answer to this. And in our specific case in Portugal, we have these games, well, we have the luck to be working with abstract games, which makes the investment very low. I mean, how much does it cost to print a 8x8 board? Nothing. Well, it does a little bit, but and it has environmental impacts, and all of these are issues, of course. But yeah, it all depends on what exactly you're doing and how you're doing it. And so, if I know a specific source of funding, no. But if you do, talk to me.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that encouraging presentation. It was not boring at all. It was really good. The thing is, like, you did a very good study about the good part of doing a game. But when I am using games with my students, I feel like a lot of frustration. Like, have you searched about that and how we can turn that frustration into maybe an opportunity or something that can be changed? Because losing is not always easier for people. So how you manage that? Thank you.
Well, I think there is a tradition about winning and losing that goes far beyond whatever we are doing research-wise. I think you never lose, especially when you're playing games that are challenging and that make you want to play better. And to stress this with students specifically might help them cope with losing and might, okay, now you lost, but perhaps if you play a couple more times, you will understand the strategy and then you will start to become better. And that's also the advantage of using certain kinds of pairing strategies in tournament styles, like the Swiss tournament and so on. You kind of match gamers, players who have the same level of skill, and so they are challenged appropriately. And from there on, well, it's a universe where you can, yeah, I mean, all the teachers present will know that there are so many answers to so many specific questions that it would be unjust to answer any one of them specifically, because they are very rarely you can very rarely generalize them. And so, yeah.
Hello, I'm a teacher, and I'm also own a company that makes games for education. And we encounter a problem often, and the problem is that teachers don't necessarily have the skills to understand games. Even read a rule book can be like a challenge for them. So I think that in the future, institutions that teach teachers should focus more on games. But do any of you know if anything is happening in this area? Does school institutions that teach teachers take like the board game thing seriously and try to teach teachers to make board games? Is anything happening out there? I guess my question is.
Well, I think it's the same thing with the demand again. It comes down to the more people are interested to introduce games in education, the more teachers are interested in actually, you know, getting skills themselves to promote this. And I think we are walking in the right direction. And like I said, the 8x8 project, one of the concerns is how do you get teachers to not only play, but also to transmit the information correctly to their students and to stress the right points and to understand what is interesting behind the game. I mean, of course, it's important for someone to be able to play a game well, but and naturally things will evolve in a direction. But as a teacher, you also want to explore other benefits other than regular play. And as a history teacher, you would like to have your students understand a little bit more of history. As a mathematics teacher, you would like to have your students a little bit more skills in mathematics. And in general, teachers want their students to be more critical about the knowledge they have in general. And so, yeah, I think it all comes down to that.
I will stop questions now because the speakers do have the possibility to have a discussion, and this will be until 12:30. And yes, then the first session is over. So just give them the possibility to discuss now.
So,
on peut prendre la question.
Okay, so you do a discussion with the audience?
Yeah, I think an open discussion. And
okay, so we will do an open discussion. So just ask questions to all of the speakers.
I have a question.
You have a question?
I do have a question, but perhaps.
Okay, so in the back there is one question.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. I'm trying to promote games in Dutch education. And what I see is that games are always additional. So it's very depending on the teacher whether they do it or not. And I'm curious if you're thinking about a way to get games in the curriculum. I want to get games in the curriculum, like
Please
books.
Don't.
Are you thinking about that? Do you know ways to get more games in the...
I think opinions are very diverse on that. I would oppose to getting it into the curriculum because you take away a very big element, which is the element of play. If something gets obligatory and you get things too structured where you have to do it. But this is a philosophical discussion, which I think we will among each other have disagreements on. And but yeah,
we have to make games obligatory.
Okay, open there is.
So I would like to hear your thoughts on how could we connect those who are enthusiastic and passionate about using games to teach better among each other, because there are a lot of connections in the digital game world. I mean, all of you over there, and but how can we do this for the analog part? Because I think that's where the knowledge is very scattered and there's not a lot of interaction out there. And I would also be interested in research on what are the necessary skills for teachers to use analog games, and in which kind of educational settings do they have to be embedded to be effective? So not just what kind of effects do they have, but when are they most effective? So do you know of research there, and how could we connect each other in this respect?
I'm sorry, I don't have a clear answer to that, but at the beginning of Gaming Lab, the idea was to create a community of researchers and understand the needs to develop the field of research on the board game influence. I think now we have succeeded to begin a community of researchers and create a motivation and engagement into this theme. Maybe our next move, we don't have planned it, but maybe it could be to make the same work with the teacher side, to create the community, understand the needs, and see what option we can bring to them, creating like the platform I've already answered earlier. We are very open to exchange with the teacher side and see what option we can offer to help this kind of initiative. So I don't have a clear answer for you, just an open opportunities to develop.
I wanted to give one little comment to the question about how the teachers are taught the games. I'm working at the Swiss Museum of Games, and we teach teachers, for example, to play Awele, Wari, the West African Mancala variant. And the game has been introduced via the museum, in the local schools. In the local school, and some regional schools also do so. So we teach the teachers how to play and how to use the game, but then, of course, it depends largely on the teachers themselves and on the director of the school. You have to interest the administration and the director of the school. In our case, in our city, the director is very convinced and very enthusiastic about it, and so they organize every 2 years a big tournament of the school. And but it's from one school. You have to do the work in any one school. You know, it's not a general. You cannot go to the Ministry of Culture and Education and they will introduce it to the schools. You have to do one school after the other, one teacher after the other, and one school after the other.
That's the network.
You were, as I understood you correctly, you were mostly in France with your well endeavors. If you were to make something like she suggested, is it possible to make it international? Because I think it's well, it's a broadly carried thing. Yeah. Well, that was my question.
Once again, for the research side, we have started in France because it was very convenient for us. It was very easy to gather people in Paris and start the brainstorming with them like this. But now the project is mature enough to spread it at an international level. As I've previously exposed, I'm working with the US community to develop the program here. Thanks to the different branches we have in Asmodee, I can connect with different type of different kind of networks from the academic side. So it's a group level project for Asmodee Research. So if we want to take another initiative in the teacher side, it will be at an international level as well.
Hello, hi. Hello, I'm from China. I'm from Shanghai, and as an educator, I'm really interested in bringing all this board game method back into China. Yet in China, it's really a new market. The parents as well as the teachers, they really don't quite understand what board games can do and how it will get better for their child as an early educator or even for their further studies. So for us, we need to like tell them how it can be better for their children. What kind of outcome can they get after they take maybe board game classes and some other type of games. So do you have any suggestion on how to prove that to the parents and to the teachers so that we could make it a better market in the future?
It was also something we have seen at the beginning of the project. A lot of people have intuition about the effect of board games, and we want to have this kind of study to have the scientific proof of the effect of board games, of board game influence. And this argument will be beneficial for the global market, for the global industry, for the global professional who are using board game, to not have only intuition, but have strong scientific arguments that in this environment, board games are doing so. And it will take time, because science takes time, I know that, but maybe in a couple of years, we will have some studies, some reports about the real effect of board games in educational environment, for instance. So today, I don't have a strong argument to give you, but maybe in a close future, yes.
But the problem we have, and that's, so I'm going to be the bad guy of the, that's the problematic posed, like just talking about the board games in general is going to be really hard. So what probably, it's just like the Loch Ness monster we're looking for, just having, it was like saying that TV is great. TV is great for kids in general. You can say, yeah, so what we have now is that we just have situated results. So we can see that this kind of game for this kind of kids is working well. But as I was saying, that sometimes board games and some on video games it's working well, that sometimes kids or students who are really good, who are performing a lot in the traditional system, they are underperforming when you make them playing. So we have to be scientific. Just having not a gigantic result like board games is good for people in the world, just like some board games are yeah. For now, that's the only result we can have. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I also have a comment on that, and I agree with you. It's very topical. It depends very on the situation, and it depends very much on the subject, if it's which pupil is playing. So, for instance, for the mathematical games, what we do have is we have results that bad students start to perform better because they are faced with a different sort of way of looking at the things. But please keep in mind that this is not taken out of a reality. It's still within a school reality. So they do play games in their free times and in the classrooms as extra activities quite a lot, but they keep on going to school. And that's why I think it's also important and this to speak about to the institutionalization and to include games in the curriculum. It's very easy to make something very good go very bad, and traditionally, if you institutionalize something too much, then there become certain questions come to the top, which were at the bottom, which were not so important when you were playing a game or when you were teaching a game, that ruin the whole experience for the students and might then damage the whole output. And one more reason why it's so important that we actually look at this scientifically, why we look at all of these studies. But of course, this is a universe which is starting to be explored. But if you want to take something back to show someone, well, just teach. I would just show it in action, and I think most people will be convinced that there is a very great potential in this, and yeah.
Okay. My question, we've been talking a lot about in-depth studies about board gaming and using it and the effects on students, but I sense that a lot of educators here would like to start using board games as a means of teaching in their classrooms and want to be inspired on how to use existing games maybe already to use them in their classroom. So maybe it would be a good idea for Asmodee to maybe just on their website, which is an open platform instead of Discord, maybe add an extra topic on how certain games, which are very suited to use in a classroom, could be used and in which situations they could be used, or to what means they could be used to teach certain things in the classroom, just as a point of inspiration to teachers. Maybe it can be on the general side at the games itself as a separate topic, or maybe it's a separate page to go through with certain games which can be used in the classroom and how they can be used. Maybe that's a thing to inspire people here, and once they are inspired to use certain games, they get inspired to use other games or more games.
One fact is there are a lot of initiative countries by countries, and maybe we have the idea to gather all the good ideas and to create like a clear vision or something synthesizing all the good ideas. It's in the pipe. We are thinking about that. I can say how long it will take, but it's clearly one of my question, how to help the educational field with these kind of tools and good games we have.
Yeah, I have also a comment on that. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank again Asmodee for inviting us, but I must make sure that I am an independent researcher, and in that sense, I would also ask up to what point is it the responsibility of publishing like Asmodee to actually take the point in this, or to what point, and here I speak against myself, until what point does it not make sense for there to be governmental and educational departments being at the head of this and working together with Asmodee or other publishing companies. So instead of saying, well, I mean, who's the authority on teaching? Usually it's teachers and teachers. And so in that sense, I would rather say that perhaps it shouldn't all fall onto the burden of Michael to do all of this, but also on all the teachers, and to actually, move, and if there is such a big interest in getting games more into education, to pressure people who actually are promoting education. Yeah.
I'm working as a high school teacher as well, and we teachers are a very bad target audience for a board game company, because we don't have much money, and we always lack time, resources in general, and it's all a matter of experience. What I wanted to say to the comment before from the Mr. With the green shirt over there, yeah, it's all a matter of experience. So the board gaming community could give you answers which game to use in which subject or I think it's not so easy for the producers to answer this question. So for me as a teacher, it would be very nice to know from other teachers and their experiences which games I can use and which games are worthy to use in my lessons. So I have already some experience. So I'm a physics and mathematics teacher. I know what games like Subatomic or just to name one do, and I can spread that knowledge. But what we need is a network, and that is missing right now. And this is at the first part, and all the stuff you're discussing with researching, and this is a parallel aspect, but it's not the same, because one is the approach from the reality practical approach, and the other is a theoretical thing, and we have to put all both together. And sometimes I think the discussion is you are taking another road than we need to be taken, or we have another approach. So we need to get that together, I think. And I would just ask how you would like to do that long term.
Thank you. I hope I was clear enough that Gaming Lab is a philanthropic project for Asmodee. Is concerning all kind of games, all the board game field. We are not focused on Asmodee game here. Asmodee is the partner of a sponsor of the Gaming Lab project, so it's not dedicated to Asmodee games. It's one thing. And from all your comments about this panel this morning, your needs are to create a platform, create a community, a sharing experiment in the teaching fields. This was what we wanted for the academic research side. We are achieving some point for the research side. Maybe as I've already said, maybe the next move for us will be to help you guys to create this community, create this platform to exchange, and it could become one of our goals now.
I hope this is allowed, but I made a SPIEL Educators Facebook group just now, so we just want to have a network. So you're welcome to join, and then that way we can kind of continue the discussion past just today, just educator to educator or educator to other organizations. So anyways, that's out there.
Great.
Okay, are there further questions? Yeah.
So maybe a comment and a question, and goes to the high school teacher. The high school teacher is always right. Is there an established wisdom of what skills and competences you gain from, let's just say, the mainstream games? I'm a father of a 5-year-old boy, 7-year-old daughter. I can see when they play Monopoly, I can see the skills they develop. My son just started playing Stratego. We play cards. But that's just my hypothesis. If we want to develop the games in education, can your research help us with the business case? And sorry for being so blatant here, but I think we need a business case to tell the people with the budgets in the schools that if we invest in the daycare, give us some money for games, because we can see a significant improvement in this competency of the kids, of the students.
Short answer, yes.
Yeah, what I was thinking is that from a sociological point of view, sorry about that, but there's a really interesting correspondence between the way school is working and the board game. When you compare why board game, or maybe why video games are so massive compared to board games, it's obvious that video games is much more present in the working class kids or the popular class, probably because video game is working in inductive way. I mean, you don't have to learn the rules. So you're just practicing the video games, and you're gonna learn the rules step by step, and that's what we call the inductive way. Board games needs first a disposition to hear some rules, just like school in a way. That's why you have a correspondence between middle class kids who's working well in class and who's playing a lot of board games, because they're used to this kind of pedagogy. First, I have to learn the rules, and then I have to apply what I've learned from the rules. Video games is working quite differently, because it's just saying, okay, just practice, you're gonna learn the rules after that. So it's first a big step, a big differentiation of practices. And we've made study in toy library, what we call in France ludothèque, when you're putting board games and video games. So kids are going to the video games because the cost of entry is really, really, really slow. And that's something we have to have in mind to understand that each media has a cost of entry. I don't know if that makes sense for you, but you have to pay something. And then when you're in the middle class, you're playing with your kids to chess or board games or stuff like that. You train them to a certain form of engagement into a school and into games. Yeah, so that's something. But what I was thinking too is that we're thinking about, and that's a professional and really interesting debate about how to use board games in schools. But we also could think how, because the study we're making is that board games and leisure activity is what we call informal learning. So kids learn a lot of things. That's what you were saying about when they're playing video games, where just walking on the internet or role-playing games, stuff like that. But the question is that what happens when you're taking informal learning into a formal situation? Sometimes you lose what was happening between when it was an informal learning. So the other question is, how can school let a space for informal learning? I mean, not just that the teacher is going to use the board game, but how he lets a place where the kids can play board games. And I was thinking that it's something we have to have in mind in order to debate about the impact of board games in terms of learning.
Okay, over there is one more question.
Maybe I have another things
sorry.
to add. There is some project to have like pedagogic product sheet, for instance, but have in mind that this kind of document has to be made by the community, by expert who has experienced the game into school, and not by a publisher, because I don't want to these kind of documents be seen like marketing tools or something like that. I want to have these educative sheets present on a platform or whatever, but made by expert or teachers who has already experienced the game in their classroom to share their experiment, and not making by publisher or distributor to have the bad side of marketing tools.
Yeah. And in regards to the scientific backgrounds, like skill sets that you can get and so on, so addressing that specifically, there has, I mean, ever since Plato, there's the benefits and the downfalls of games are discussed. So there are a lot of great minds who have thought about it, and like everything in science, we stand on the shoulders of giants. But to name a few that are very big in game, what is a game, for instance? You have Huizinga, a historian who thinks about it. You have Carlois, who defines the game slightly differently. And just this can be a start for teachers to just kind of take a look at what those people consider to be a game and what not. taught, but also what those games, what makes those games interesting. And if you, this is from a historical point of view, if you go further on, the further on you go, the more research is done into education and what sort of things. And there are a lot of things being published and produced which do focus on specific skill sets. And for instance, like I said, for the championship, it's important that the games are short. It's important that the games are challenging. So you cannot just play tic-tac-toe, else it would, you know, would be a bit boring. It cannot be too complex. I mean, at least in a school environment and so on. And so there are multiple things that you have to concern of what games are played, and then that's why there is a big need to do more studies and to take a look into this. And like, I mean, of course, everything goes hand in hand. I mean, economy, progress, education, research, and so on go hand in hand. And so that's why it's so good to have this exchange today here, and to have educators involved, to have publishing companies involved, to have researchers involved, and to have us started talking and pushing us towards the precipices of gaming.
So to bounce off of the bringing the informal into the formal setting, I think it's a really palpable thing in the classroom. I'm actually I'm an educator. I'm also in the process of designing board games. I'm writing rule books and understanding the process of negotiating rules as a really informal way for learning to occur. So going back to the conversations like, oh well, we don't teach our teachers how to teach these games. It's a lot of it comes down to house rules. I mean, the difference between a video game and a board game is house rules. I don't know how many times I've made a change to a game because I'm like, this doesn't really fit with what we're doing right now, so we're going to change it. And for the students to be able to do this, especially at the primary level where I'm at, for them to be able to negotiate and navigate these rules and make their own rules is a big part of their play in general. So to see that socialization come into play in the classroom, as far as making it informal, I have an hour every Friday. It's Fun Friday. Here's board games. Here's cards. And every one week out of the entire month, you can use internet. Besides that, you just go for it. And I don't step in. I don't step in rules. Figure it out on your own. Giving them the space to do that, I think, kind of addresses a lot of our concerns. Because it is a very formalized thing with the rule book. But then the informal ability to work face to face creates another dimension that video games don't have. And in the classroom, when you have video games, if you bring that in, you have that tension of, are they interacting? Where's the learning happening? Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that into.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm more convinced by the potential of learning of board games. For me, is just when you use board games. That's what you were saying. When you use video games in a class session, you transform partially the nature of the activity. Play is not just about content; is the relation, the way you do it. So that's why I'm more convinced by the informal aspect of educative process.
Hello, I'm coming from another field. I'm a software developer, but I'm an educator as well into the non-formal education. But as well, I have a bit of a experience with formal education because my mother is a teacher, and I am seeing a big rise in using games and gamification in non-formal education, but I see that it's really hard to get it into formal education because there are tons of paperwork which you need to fill, and it's hard to put it, like, to say why are you doing it. But can you say or propose good examples of how, even in non-formal education, how board games can be used, like make a session with the kids, or just share good examples of how game can be used, and as well good tips about creating an educational board game. For example, how the session should be held, or like tips about what games are good educational board games. Thank you.
So this is a very complex question because it has many different layers. So it all depends, for instance, what year are you teaching? And are you working with small children? Are you working with big children? Are you working with big children? adults. And in what context are you using these games, and what sort of information do you want to transmit, and so on. And so there are thousands of good examples out there. To cherry pick a few would be unfair, but of course I will do that. For instance, the championship, the mathematical championship, or I already did that. I don't even have to do it now. The mathematical championship is a good example how you have this on various levels. And so, I mean, each teacher will do it on his or her free time, in their space, in their school, in their environment. There is no national decree that all children shall play so and so many hours, and it all really depends on the teachers. And it's a very it's a motive force to have interest from the teachers themselves to promote games and to have these games played by their children. But yeah, in a school environment, I don't know, with small children, make small groups, go through several games, have them play, have them teach each other. I mean, these are just some from the top head examples. Of course, it depends on each class, on each kid. And so, yeah. I don't know if you have any good examples in your studies, or you with teachers.
Yeah, a way we explore in vocational education is to mix the informal and formal, and a way is to think the game experience like an experience, and then to come back to the formal with a debriefing. Like an internship in industry, for example, is an informal experience, and they come back to the school. It's the same way of thinking. So game is an experience, and debriefing is instructional and formal complementary use.
There's a lot of academic research about informal learning and mainly about game. So they are study mainly about role-playing game, that how through role-playing game you're engaging into, not because you want to learn, but because you want to play, but suddenly you're hear about the ancient Greece, so you have to watch how they look like, stuff like that. So there's a lot of literature about that. I worked on, I made my PhD on World of Warcraft, so video game, but I was interested how, so I have some young player, they were just bad in math, they were just have bad evaluations, stuff like that. But when I was looking what they were doing in the game, they were calculating complex stuff about their armor, about their template, and that's a problem, that's a fundamental problem we have in education is, I think I wrote it, is that how to transfer that. So, and it's a problem not just about game, it's coming from mainly Jean Lave, she's an anthropologist, she works about that, she see how people can make, she was studying a mother from a popular neighborhood, and she was showing how they were using math in order to do shopping. To feed everyone, to plan for 1 week. But when you ask them the same problem in a class situation, they can't do it. So it's a theoretical problem we have, and board game is really good for that. So you can see, or games in general, you can see a player doing something very complex, and you ask them to transfer it to another situation, and it doesn't work. So I don't have the answer, but that's for me the big big challenge is some people say transferability is a myth, that everything is situated, every knowledge we have is situated. That's the approach of Jean Lave or some of that, just thinking we have the myth of, because of math, that we could transfer some knowledge, and some people say yes, their transferability, it's just that the situation has to be more they're similar, more you can transfer. So it's a big debate, and I think more research would help, but I don't need to grant.
So you basically say that because maths and games are actually the same thing, it's easy to transfer?
No, I'm saying that math is a special kind of human knowledge, which is modelizing, so it's math is supposed that you have procedure, that you can do some operation. It's the same one you can do here, but you can do the same process for another one. But what other knowledge could do that? I mean, history, no, it's always situated. Language is situated. I mean,
yeah. I think it comes also down. I meant this a little bit as a joke, because mathematics is said to be the greatest games of all, played with pencil and paper. Of course, everyone agrees. But I was saying this a little bit as a joke. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities. But I think it comes down to a lot to the skills that are being used, and this depends again. And this again, I'm trying to make a point that it really is a very point dependent. It depends on the game. I mean, games like timelines are very good to stimulate memory. Games where you have to have quickness to response and so on are good to help motor skills and so on. And there are studies being done about each game in particular. So it's very, very hard to generalize this all. And this also, I think, has been our point to show that it is a very rich subject. It is a very huge universe to think about. And so, yeah, for instance, abstract games, they are very helpful to transmit certain capabilities for mathematical reasoning. And in the same way that there are very good games to transmit certain historical memory. I speak about this because we have a colleague of ours who does research in how to transmit history and so on. But in general, yeah, it really is a huge world that needs a lot more research, and which needs more studies on all fronts, be it sociology, mathematics, history, philosophy, and how, I mean, we again, I stress this, we have this meeting, which is the Board Game Studies Colloquium, which will be held in Paris 13, where a lot of scholars come together and discuss this from all these different worlds, education and so on, and where we exchange a lot, which is, it's important that it stays multidisciplinary, because there are many things that play together, and yeah.
Yeah, well, let me see, this is getting very academic. And I think basically I have been teaching with role-playing games, board games, everything for 15 years. And I know that my toolbox is huge compared to teachers that don't have this toolbox. And don't we agree that your research showed that there is a motivational force in it, that there are like a huge area that is positive? And we are discussing like, and then maybe they didn't get precisely what they should in you know, in the subject matter. But there is like so many huge benefits doing this. So there is actually no reason to keep boring kids to death. Don't we agree on that? Isn't the research showing this?
Well, I mean, as a researcher, we have to consider all possibilities, right? And I mean, the education system as it stands needs reviewing pretty much everywhere, and this is a personal belief, so please count me accountable for that. So I mean, but it can, in this very standard way, it can be very positive. It can be, and I'm a recreational mathematician, so I play with mathematics quite a lot. But I'm the first to admit that formal education is a necessity that is beneficial. And so games, yes, but always to complement something and not on its own, or on their own, just like that. There needs to be something to be thought about. And yeah, I think that's what we're doing.
Okay, so in time, so we have to stay with the schedule. There is time for one short question, and I hope the answers are short as well. Okay, this is not a short question, so maybe you had a question. Is this a short one? Okay, a simple one. Perfect.
Björn Ole Kam from the Transcultural Studies Department, Kyoto University, Japan. I'm using games or board game design assignments in my teaching, but I mainly come from EduLARP, from educational and political live action role-playing games. And concerning this fragmentation of analog gaming studies, edulopers also struggle with proving that their interventions are effective, especially when it comes to ephemeral things like empathy and so on. And a lot of discussions happened about debriefing, so the reflection phase, which is much more important than the actual playing. And it took us ages to realize that this discussion had already happened in the simulation and gaming field. I mean, the International Simulation and Gaming Association had its 50-year anniversary this year. And that was like a parallel development, and only through some personal connections this happened to be realized. So a lot of discussions that happened here today and problems you're talking about, some stuff has already been done in simulation and gaming. So I was just wondering, are you familiar or have you connections to this field? And yeah, that's it.
So yes. Like I said, the Board Game Studies Colloquium is something that started in 1996, I believe. And so it is a multidisciplinary field where people come together exactly to exchange themselves and to be aware of different worlds out there. And so, yeah, we were aware of that. But that's also, again, why it's important to stress what do you understand about, or what do you stand by games or board games, or because for me, for instance, games includes magic and illusionism, because you're making a game. Well, anyway, just to say that it's a world. But yeah. So yeah, there's lots to be spoken about, lots of places you can. We have mentioned a couple of them. I think many of them will be put online and in social networks coming from here on. And yeah.
Yeah, okay, so great session. Thank all the speakers once again.